Debt deflation and liquidationism. I'm learning how to work with this thing. So, first, what is debt deflation and what is liquidationism? Well, liquidationist is a person who favors liquidation of the investment caused by market adaptation to passive government policy. So let me be clear about what passive government policy means. Well, it means any policy that is passive, meaning that it doesn't matter what the conditions are, because conditions can be different, right? You can have different institutional setups. Therefore, passive policy of the government can be different under different arrangements. In any case, very often, when you see a crisis happening, you could have government non-reacting, right? Non-reacting meaning that letting the things go their way according to the existing institutional circumstances. Now, what the circumstances are might be very, very crucial. So you could have very differing institutional arrangements, different legal frameworks, that will cause completely different results. Nevertheless, the passive aspect will mean that the government is not doing much, right? Meaning that it's letting the river flow its way according to the circumstances, right? So it's not any particular policy, this passive approach, right? The end result and the type of policy may be completely differently designed. Nevertheless, you see the government non-reacting and you say government is passive, right? This is one of the reasons why Hayek hated the term laissez-faire, right? Because he was against the term laissez-faire, because he said laissez-faire basically means non-doing something, but non-doing something doesn't mean it's something good, right? Something beneficial or something desirable. Now, debt deflation generally is the process of deleveraging of financial institutions. And the main question I will try to address is in this presentation is, do Austrians need to be extreme liquidationists? Right? So meaning, do Austrians need to favor a policy of non-reacting no matter what the circumstances are? Right? So whenever you see a crisis happening and banks falling or many institutions falling under the existing setup, the Austrians need to always cheer up for that, right? Always saying, "Hey, bankruptcy is cool," right? That's the skull you see there. So we're always clapping and being very, very happy that they are going down. Let's open the champagne, right? Let's have fun. Now, I will start with the difference between Austrian science and Austrian pop. Right? So Austrian science is, especially macroeconomic science, is the theory of the business cycle. Right? So macroeconomic description of cycle movements caused by various factors, usually caused by credit expansion with artificially low interest rates. Right? So you know the story of ABCT, as it is called. It's a theory of boom-bust. Boom is caused by low interest rate, credit expansion, mall investments are caused by that, and then the end result, at some point, you have a bust. So bust is actually not something external, exogenous, meaning that it comes from internal market forces. It is something caused previously by malinvestments and bad monetary policy or bad banking decisions, depending on which version of the ABCT you prefer. So there is a causal relationship between the boom and the bust. That's the Austrian science explanation of the relationship, right? Causal realist explanation. Now, apart from Austrian science, you have Austrian pop, right? Austrian pop, and Austrian pop is Austrian pop is the name I use for popular Austrian writings, where you have slightly different description. And very often when you hear about Austrian explanations, especially when you hear lectures of financial analysts, you hear mostly that Austrian pop songs, right? So what is Austrian pop song? It's almost a biblical assertion that bust is a punishment for the boom, right? So these guys are going down because they deserve it. So again, let's open the champagne, right? So that would be the Austrian pop version. So bust is supposed to clean out the system, and then even sometimes you hear this expression that it is merely redistributive, right? So it's just pure redistribution. So it's almost like a zero-sum game. You have winners and you have losers. And somehow, even though most economists, and especially Austrian economists, don't believe in welfare measurements, right? You cannot really say that welfare stays the same. Generally, you could hear that it's only a question of redistribution. So net effect could be seen as a zero-sum game, right? Meaning that somebody wins, somebody loses, but averaging things out somehow, well, it's no different than usual workings of the financial system. When somebody sells the stock and somebody buys it, so usually somebody wins, somebody loses, but the net effect is just a zero-sum game. Right? But this Austrian pop, very often heard, right, is based on this assertion that liquidationism, right, so the bank or many institutions going down, it's a natural consequence of the boom, and actually it's cleaning out the system, right? So it's supposed to happen, like no matter how the cleaning works, right? Because again, the so-called passive government policy means the government is not doing anything. But under different institutional arrangements, it can mean completely separate things, right? Not doing anything, sorry. Here we come to distinction that is present in the Austrian science, right? In the writings of Austrian economists, this distinction between recession and secondary depression. So what's the distinction? Well, roughly, sometimes it's really hard to make this distinction, but roughly, it is a difference between liquidation of mall investments caused by artificially low interest rates and falling money supply. So what's the difference? Well, the difference is that falling money supply usually hurts almost every single business, apart from businesses which are betting against the banking system or against the financial markets, right? So very narrow. You always have winners. Even during Great Depression, you had businesses that earn a lot of money. Nevertheless, the falling money supply or the adjustment process associated with falling money supply actually was hurting not only the main industries that benefited from artificially low interest rate during the boom, but also most of other businesses that were not connected at all to the system, to the financial system, or were not actually benefiting from those low interest rates, right? Now, naturally, the border line between the two, it's blurred in reality very often, right? So sometimes it's really hard to make the difference, right? Or point, oh, this is the business that benefited from artificially low interest rates, and this is the business that didn't benefit at all, and it's hurt by the falling banking system. So we cannot really make this distinction fully, as usual it is the case in economics. Nevertheless, qualitatively we can grasp the difference, right? At least the degree of the difference. There is a degree. There are some small steps that you could see between the two, between liquidation of mall investment and then falling banking system or falling money supply that hurts everyone, basically, right? And that would be the distinction between recession, usual cleaning out of the system where you get rid of wrong investments, and going further than that, right? So allowing for the whole system to collapse, and then this thing hurting all the other businesses that did not benefit directly from low interest rates. So overall, this could be seen as a mirror of the difference between the fiat money regime and gold exchange standard, right? So you will see when you will see the history of the United States, you will see that the worst in terms of performance, economic performance, analyzing the unemployment rate, falling banks, and then GDP fluctuations and overall economic growth, you will see that actually fiat money regime looks a bit better than gold exchange standard. There might be different explanations for that. I don't want to go into that because then we would have to have another lecture. Nevertheless, I believe that it has a lot to do with this distinction between just pure liquidation of mall investment and then the whole banking system falling and going down the tube with everything else, right? So taking all the businesses with it, since money is the life of the economy. Now, about this distinction between recession and secondary depression, or as it is called, secondary deflation, I give to you three quotes from Austrian thinkers, important Austrian thinkers, so Ludwig von Mises, Friedrich von Hayek, and Rothbard, starting with Mises, who has written, deflation and credit contraction, no less than inflation and credit expansion, are elements disarranging the smooth course of economic activities. Right? So he sees the inflation as the car hitting the pedestrian, right? And then the process of deflation, falling money supply, as putting on the reverse gear and trying to fix the problem by going backwards, right? Over the pedestrian again. Right, so he's not really seeing the deflation of the money supply, falling money supply, as something fixing the thing. Right? Of course, by deflation, he doesn't mean price deflation. Right? Price deflation is something else, actually. Price deflation I'll leave till the end of the presentation. What he means by deflation is purely monetary approach to the money supply and credit created with creation of the money supply. Right, so he was against that, and he has seen it as a disruptive element, just as disruptive as inflationary policy. Right? He even has written in Human Action that nobody favors such a policy, deflationary policy of falling money supply. So I don't even need to deal with that. Right? So he should have waited for Rothbard to show up, huh? And then telling him, no, I favor that. Okay. Hayek, of course, naturally, he was even more reserved. So, although I do not regard deflation as the original cause of a decline in business activity, such a reaction has unquestionably the tendency to induce the process of deflation, typical Hayek, right, going on and on and on, to cause what more like Energizer commercial, could be like a bunny saying that, right? To cause what more than 40 years ago I called secondary deflation. The effect of which may be worse. In the 30s certainly was worse, and that was the original cause of the reaction made necessary. Okay. So in any case, what he means is that deflation happening after the process of the boom and falling money supply can actually lead to more serious damage than the initial boom, right? Always, this is the greatest case of that is Great Depression case, right? It's really, you cannot explain the greatness of Great Depression by merely referring to the boom, right? You wouldn't say to a person unemployed in 1937 for like being unemployed for 7 years, you wouldn't tell that person now, this is because of the boom that happened, 10 years ago, right? You couldn't say that, right? So there are necessary, there are other factors necessary to cause such a long depression, right? Not only the boom could be initially the problem, but then what was going on after that, after the recession, was even more important. And everybody, of course, agrees with that. And according to Hayek, this was one of the problems. So he would certainly agree with Friedman's analysis of the Great Depression to some point, that letting the money supply collapse was one of the factors that caused additional problems. And then even Rothbard, right? So even Rothbard, even though if you read Rothbard, you will see that overall he was cheering for monetary deflation. At one point in Mystery of Banking, when he was talking about the monetary reform, he actually has written something in the spirit of Hayek and Mises, where he said that we have to make steps that will allow us ensuring against of wrecking deflation that would lead to a severe recession and numerous bankruptcies. For the logic of returning of 500 required deflation of money supply down to existing bank reserves. This would be a massive deflationary ringer indeed, and one wonders whether a policy equally sound and free market oriented which can avoid such a virtual short-lived economic holocaust. Right? So he admits in here indirectly that actually falling money supply can be an economic holocaust, right? So in the spirit of Hayek and Mises, of course, in other works, most of the works, 80% of works, he did not write such things, right? He was cheering for monetary deflation more often, and he was not the only one actually. I think there were economists in the 30s that accepted monetary contraction, but not as something beneficial, because Rothbard was making actually arguments that it's very beneficial because it stimulates, because it speeds up the adjustment process, because it stimulates savings. But the other economists in the 30s, well, he was not the one in the 30s, of course, but the other economists arguing in favor actually were were arguing that this is something that we have to accept if you want to stay on the gold standard, right? So this is like a necessary price, gold exchange standard, of course, with the central bank. So this is a necessary price that we have to pay to keep the system floating. Okay, so now why did deflation? There are various arguments against monetary contraction. I think the most interesting arguments were made by Fisher, Irving Fisher, who is unfortunately famous for other things he's done, not for this one, either for his mathematical works. If you're interested, you could read his doctorate degree about mathematical investigations into theory of value. Very, very interesting literature. And of course, Fisher equation and his quantity theory of money. So anyway, he's famous for his works about the equilibrium theory. Right? So that's why he's famous. He's considered one of the best American economists ever. And then after he basically went bankrupt during Great Depression, he changed his mind almost about everything. And then he's not famous for the works he has written at that time. Well, at least he was not that famous until a few years ago when people started to be again interested in his works about that deflation theory. In general, again, I don't want to assess the theory, but I want to vindicate Fisher for this because he was one of the first economists actually focusing on that, and he's better in explaining why the adjustment process during monetary deflation is sluggish. Why the process is sticky and why the process is rigid. Usually when you hear the arguments about monetary contraction, they are pure pricing arguments, meaning that prices are rigid, prices are not adjusting, and so forth and so forth. Now, Fisher makes different arguments. So, what's the essence of the deflation theory? Well, first we have the phenomenon of over-indebtedness, right? So if it increases in debt during the boom, naturally, this over-indebtedness. Oh, again, sorry. Let's go back. You could ask, what is? This is killing me. So what is over-indebtedness? Again, subject to the debate. What does it mean that the institutions, the firms are over-indebted? That's another issue to be discussed. But again, we're focusing generally. So over-indebtedness, which during the bust will end up in debt liquidation and distress selling, right? Because if you're indebted, then you have to pay your debts. During the crisis, you have to sell your assets, so you're engaged in distress sellings. Furthermore, this induces falling prices, falling net worth, businesses going down, and then you have falling profits. And if you have falling profits, this is terrible, right? Because then if you have falling profits, you have falling output. The adjustment takes time, but then apart from that, you have additional consequences. You have hoarding, because you see businesses falling, you see some monetary deflation also happening. So you're hoarding money, so you're increasing your monetary demand. This influences the interest rate usually because it's at the expense of the investment expenditures. And then when the interest rate rises, you have again the problem of over-indebtedness visualizing, right? Because the firms cannot take even more debt, they have to pay their debts and they have to sell their assets. Therefore, you have this vicious circle, right? Again, you have debt liquidation or distress selling, assets going down, and so on, right? Like a vicious cycle. Which interestingly led Fisher to completely change his mind about economic policy. In the 20s, he favored a version of gold exchange standard, something like that, with the central bank trying to hit the right price of the gold to keep the system stable, to keep the price level stable, right? So he was very happy about the policy in the 20s. And even in 29, he said, the stocks are going up and will always go up, basically. Right? So we're having a really, really good time now. But then the situation completely reversed, and we had a serious Great Depression, the biggest contraction in the history of the capitalist system. And then Fisher changed his mind. Right, so he started to looking for the problems of over the indebtedness and financial booms, and he found the victim. The victim was fractional reserve banking, and in his publication in the 30s, he proposed a system of 100% fiat standard, right, 100% dollar standard, because on the one side he wanted to still have active monetary policy to keep up the price level stable, right? So you need monetary expansion, right? But on the other hand, you have this evil fractional reserve banking system that allows to create over-indebtedness, right? Because the main problem associated with monetary expansion within the banking system is that the banks are creating money, but they're not giving it away, right? They create it and they create immediately also the creditor relation, creditor-debtor relation, right? Because they create money and they lend it to someone, right? So this creates the phenomenon of over-indebtedness because this pushes out the natural capital accumulation that you have in the capitalist system through just equity and savings without the creation of money, right? So savings in terms of equity and investment spending, they are very, very stable, right? It just depends on people's preferences to save. But in the banking sector, this is not so obvious. The financial intermediation is a bit more fragile, right? So we have creation of new money, and then this new money crowds out the typical capital accumulation with equity funding, right? So therefore, the best way is just to get rid of this thing that creates the phenomenon of over-indebtedness, and then creates the potential problem of deflation, monetary deflation itself, right? So if you get rid of fractional reserves, then you will get rid of the problem of possible over-indebtedness, and then the system will be more stable. Meaning that any fluctuations will not be associated with monetary contraction, right? Because if you have 100% fiat standard, money is completely covered, banks cannot really go down, and the central bank can perform a happy monetary policy of printing money via Friedman rule, right? So 5% or 2% or 3%, I don't know which one. It's supposed to be a simple program, but anyway, create additional amounts of money each year to bid up the price level. So I'm not assessing the theory right now. I think it needs a serious correction and serious developments and so on. I don't want to make my statements about this because then you will attack me, and I don't want that. But again, I want to vindicate Fisher to show that he was one of the first to deal with it, with the problem of monetary contraction. And what I really like about his arguments is that he's not really focusing directly on price rigidity or price deflation as a problem. Well, he does to some extent, but as you see in his arguments, it's not really price deflation itself that is the problem. And here is why I'm referring to this happy fellow, William Harold Hutt, who was writing about significance of price adjustments. And you can actually make Fisher arguments reliable to some extent with getting rid of pointing to price deflation as a problem. And my argument is that, well, as most Austrian arguments are, that price deflation actually is not a problem. It is never a problem. Actually, no price can be a problem at all. Prices are your friends. Always, right? Because price is just a amount of property that you can receive for getting rid of your property. So this is something that allows you to change in your environment, in your financial environment, in your personal environment, right? Whatever you do, whether you go to the restaurant and you see high prices, right? I had a friend like that, right? You could go to the restaurant with him, he's reading the prices in the menu, I would complain, oh, these prices are high, and he's like, shut up and eat or get out. Things are just priced, so you just enjoy them and don't complain, right? A pretty rough way to analyze reality, but in any case, there is some point in it, right? So all the things are just priced. So just accept the price or just refuse to engage in any exchange. And this is always true, whether it's high inflation or high price deflation. Price deflation is always a good thing whenever it's happening, because if it's happening, it means it has to happen, right? So what I mean by this is that price flexibility during both inflation and deflation is a good thing. So paradoxically, price inflation and price deflation are always optimal, right? Which is against intuition, you could think, right? But then let's analyze the case of high inflation, right? So you're thinking we have 20% increases in prices at the stores. You could complain, those prices are increasing by 20%, right? This is something uncomfortable. No, actually, the fact that they increased by 20% still allows you to buy stuff, because otherwise, if the price did not go up, you would have a shortage, so you wouldn't be able to buy it. The real problem is what caused the price inflation initially, and usually this is printing of money by the government. Right? So when you were living in the era of high inflation, the high inflation was actually a solution to the problem of creation of money in the first place. Right? So similarly, when you see price deflation during the crisis, price deflation is usually a solution to the problem, right? It's not the initial problem itself. It just helps you solve the problem. And this is actually in works even of some Austrian economists, you could read that prices adjustment are problematic, right? But it's actually the argument, even if you agree that the problems in which you have prices adjustments are serious, actually you should change the argument, right? You shouldn't say that there's something wrong with the prices. Maybe there's something wrong with caused the prices to go down, but the falling down itself is actually a solution to the problem, right? So the big issue is always what prices are adjusting to, right? Because they are always adjusting to some conditions that have to be addressed, right? Some problems have to be addressed. So X can be a problem, but prices reacting to X never can be a problem. Right? So the way they react, they are supposed to react. So when they are rigid, as Jakob was saying yesterday during his lecture, when they are rigid, well, apparently there is some optimal stickiness of prices associated with the market dynamics. Right? The completely flexible prices would actually be a disaster. Right? So you need prices to be sticky to some extent. And falling prices themselves, they will allow you to solve the problem. Right, so think about going bankrupt, right? You're going bankrupt, you have to sell your flat or you have to sell your assets quickly and you have to lower the prices. So you could complain, oh, the prices are low, I have to sell my real estate right now. Well, you could complain, but actually the fact that they go down, the prices go down, allows you to sell it in the first place, right? So it's not really a falling price that is the problem for you. The problem was initial bankruptcy or financial trouble that you got into in the first place. Now the answers. So do Austrians need to be extreme liquidationists? Well, not really. The main thing in the Austrian analysis is the significance of price adjustment and the importance of price adjustments under various conditions. ABCT does not imply liquidationism. It merely, and here's the summary, so it demonstrates the effects of credit expansion, monetary contraction, and, of course, selective bailouts. Now, I am not, well, the presentation is a bit cut into pieces, right? So I am not making any particular statements. This is treated as a Hegelian bite, right? To think about the problem, right? I am not making any case in favor of avoiding monetary contraction, or I'm not making the case for particular avoidance of monetary contraction. I am merely showing to you that pure liquidationism is actually is not part of the core of the Austrian science, right? This is not part of it. You could make some cases in favor of liquidationism, definitely, but this is not something inherently associated with Austrian science, right? Okay, so that was a bit quicker than I expected. Probably I was telling it too fast, but happily we can now fight. So comments and questions, we have, I think, 20 minutes. So
I've got a question.
Sure.
Sorry.
No, we can go first and then we go.
Because you kind of implying that all of the my investments are occurring in the real economy, right? But if you've got like 2008 and if you have Lehman Brothers or IAG and they've all got the derivatives, we can still call them malinvestments. And in the face of what you just said, we shouldn't let them go back because that would be liquidationism in the financial sector, right? So can you really put a border that this is malinvestment that we should keep and this is the one that should go bankrupt? So does this theory that we should, fear of liquidation is work 100% of the time? So, or in other way, would you rescue Lehman Brothers if you could?
No, I was actually cheering for them going down. No. So I was opening the champagne too. But It's a very, very valid point, right? The banking sector also can have investments, and then you could consider them all investments. So where do you draw the line? Well, it's really hard to draw a line, because it would be easier to draw the line if you had a precise definition of money supply, I guess. So it would be easy to draw the line before the 70s. And right now, where you have a mixture of deposit banking and investment banking, you could draw some lines that will easily allow you to classify the Lehman case as just mall investments, right? But then, since I myself believe that this precise definition of money supply is not easy to be given, I don't believe you can strictly just say this is money supply and this is not some money supply, mostly because of the reason, because under the current circumstances, this is any distinction that you will draw will not be important in the condition of the central banking system, of the central bank. Right? The central bank is the most important factor in here, just like fractional reserves. I don't believe fractional reserves today are important at all, because you have the central bank. This is the most important thing, influencing the market. So going back, because we have the central bank, then we cannot really make a separate, clear distinction between money supply and the rest. Therefore, we cannot easily give the answer to the problem that I believe you cannot easily give the answer to the problem that you posed. So I would have to say I rest my case. But anyway, I would cheer for Lehman going down, and that would be horrible if it was saved, I think. So sorry, I cannot answer that.
Yeah. Well, my question is about the price rigidities and monetary policy. If we cannot, and if we shouldn't get rid of the price rigidities because of macroeconomic reasons, what is your preferable monetary policy, and what do you think about the policy of targeting nominal GDP, a la market monetarism and Scott Sumner? Because if we cannot define money, shouldn't we focus on money times its velocity, that is nominal income?
Do we have time for another lecture? No, I don't like the policy of targeting nominal GDP for various reasons. Mainly because GDP is a bad index, right?
Okay, let's say not GDP, but nominal income, however defined, in broad way.
Well, again, I like the microeconomic approach. So whenever you see prices adjusting to any conditions, never argue about the prices as the problem, because it's macroeconomic reasoning that I dislike. What you should address is the question, so this thing that causes prices to decline in the first place, should we engage in monetary policy to stop those effects working, right? So this would be less Sumnerian and less Horwitzian argument, but more Whitean argument, right? Meaning that, so it's not the question whether we should stop prices from falling, it's the question, should we increase the money supply through fractional reserves because there is increased monetary demand? So should we economize on the increased monetary demand? And this would be a valid question, which I like much more than just targeting some. Right?
Yeah, but if we cannot get rid of a central bank, what would be this policy? Because we probably cannot also get away with fractional reserve banking, and I don't believe we should. But if this is the case, what should the central bank do right now?
It's like asking the question in socialism, what prices should be set by the central planner, right? No, I believe so, because even if you target nominally, I believe, okay, if you target GDP or nominal income to stay stable, I believe you can still have financial bubbles with the central bank.
But you will not have that deflation on that scale, because the money supply times its velocity will not collapse. Because every time it would, the central bank would go, would act and increase the money supply to stabilize.
But I believe this would happen only if you have Fisherian plan with 100% reserves, because otherwise you cannot completely control what is going on.
Well, if you suggest that there is a liquidity problem, then yes, but I don't think this is true. So this is just a comment.
Dave, Nikolai was first.
Okay, so you gave, I believe, too positive view of the Fisherian theory as one qualitatively different from arguments about inflation that do not rely on, that rely exclusively on price rigidities. So I wonder to what extent the Fisherian view is not also based on price rigidities. If you look at one of the causal relations there, so in this theory, falling prices would imply falling profits. Mm-hmm. But to me, it looks like this implies price rigidities. If prices, so again, profits are just price differences, and what matters is not the profit in nominal amount, but the return over the investment in assets, the cost spent. So you might very well, in a deflationary environment, have a significant improvement in net return of investments, so that economic activity starts again, and you do not have debt repayment problem. Of course, you would have to adjust the nominal amount of the initial debt contract to the new value of the assets, huh? Otherwise you will never pay the nominal amount. So it requires some contractual adjustment of the nominal amount of the debt. But I don't think that you have the vicious circle. This vicious circle, I have the feeling, somehow implies rigid prices. Mm-hmm. What would you think about this?
Isn't it, can it be explained as the difference between priced as real prices as expressed as prices actually allowing for exchange and price offers? Would that explain the difference? So in a way, the real prices. No, actually, I messed it up. Sorry. Yeah. Meaning that that price offers are well, the spending has to stay similar, right? I mean, yeah. So meaning that prices actually could go down, but the exchanges are not realized because there is some lag going on, right? Can you make such an argument that prices actually adjust, but then the transactions are much lower, right? And the selling of assets is still driving the process, whereas the expansion of business activity is actually being lower. So you get rid of assets and you're focusing on paying the capital off more often, right? So you're devoting more capital to get rid of the debt rather than to finance the assets, right? So this would be more like Richard Kuh's arguments about financial balance sheet recession, right? This way, probably, right? So Kuh can actually be considered as a guy who expanded Fisher's analysis and even more went away a bit from this price rigidity thing. But yeah, I would agree that in Fisher's arguments, the price rigidities are, yeah, I'm downplaying them, but he was emphasizing them more, you're right. Michał later, but first Dave.
Yeah, actually it's a related one on that with Fisher, because this is always a problem that I had with him, even though I'm really sympathetic to this debt deflation argument. The assumption that falling prices has to generally reduce profits. And you could have a situation where both input and output prices are falling down at the exact same rate, so your price spread is the same, but you don't get general reduction in profits, you just get increased profits on goods that are demand elastic and decreased profits on those that are demand inelastic. So I don't think his debt deflationism is a specific example, and the specificity would have to be that your demand elasticities would have to be identical on everything. Anyway, that's just a...
So the right side of the circle is interesting and the left side is just throw it out.
Yeah, I think it could have some appeal, but I don't think that bottom link that we've got between falling prices...
Here, this is the crucial, I agree with that.
It's a tenuous link, maybe.
Right.
But the comment I wanted to make was, I like at the beginning how you say, the obvious question of the Great Depression is what made it so great, and that's one that Austrian business cycle theory is not in a good position, at least traditionally stated, is not in a good position to answer, and you want to answer it by saying it's because of the secondary recession caused by debt deflation. I think that's your point to this. But then, just as you could say to somebody in 1937, hey buddy, you lost your job because of something that happened in 1929, and that doesn't make sense. Today, we have not had debt deflation over the last 5 years, but you're pretty hard pressed to say, hey buddy, you still don't have a job because something that happened 6 years ago, and we don't have debt deflation. So I don't think this is it could potentially be an explanation, but I don't think it's a general. There's other factors, obviously there's other factors at play.
Yeah, you're right. I agree.
Yeah, so I have another comment. I'm not sure if that deflation theory is not an example of a price rigidity. Overall, a debt repayment is a repayment that is also fixed in nominal terms. So there is this article in Cato, on Econ Law called Debt, the stickiest price of all. And I do believe very strongly that this is the case with debt repayments, that they are set nominally. So the solution to this, of course, other than the nominal income policy by the central bank, would be to in all debt contracts, to make this clause about the nominal GDP. And so if the nominal GDP would fall, the debt repayment would also fall. And if it would rise, it would also rise. So in this way, you could limit the effect of changing nominal GDP on debt repayments. But unfortunately, this I think is a very costly way to do this. But I guess that if we cannot change the monetary policy of a central bank, this would be the way to solve the debt deflation problem.
Yeah, but not under. But you can sign a private contract saying that, right?
That's true, and some governments issue such bonds. But the problem is that debt deflation does not apply only to governments. It also applies to private individuals. And since I'm not sure if they really understand the causation between falling nominal income and their ability to repay debts, this is why they do not include such clauses in the contract. So if it could be done on a wide scale, I guess it would be one of the possible solutions to the debt deflation scare.
But referring to the first thing you said, yeah, it can be considered debt as the most rigid price. Yeah, but then this is... it makes sense, but this is something really different than the usual argument of price rigidities related to labor markets, right? To price rigidities understood as current price offers that are formed based on past expectations, right? Because that's the usual rigidity argument, maybe apart from New Keynesian literature, but Right. But then the usual argument about prices not adjusting is the fact that you have those evil unions and all the people used to higher wages, so they are not allowing new contracts to be lower, right? But the past, the bygones staying on our backs can be considered a price rigidity, although I would say it's something else, right? It's not really a price anymore because it was just realized, right? But Dave, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I don't actually buy the argument that the price of debt is the most rigid price because restructurings are pretty common. During a boom, I mean. And restructurings are a nice way to change the price of debt rather than a general inflation, because a general inflation just saves everybody. While the problem is not that, let's say, all prices are too high or all prices are too low on even the bus. The problem is some are too high and some are too low. And restructurings allow us to get rid of the ones which are wrong and reset the ones which still have a hope and hell of success.
Well, to me the problem is which solution is faster and which solution is less costly. I guess as renegotiating all debt contracts is extremely costly because you also have this who goes first problem from the monetary equilibrium theory. So in order to renegotiate your debts, the other guys also should have renegotiated their debts, because if they negotiate the debt with you and they still have to pay high debt to someone else, it's a problem. So in a banking sector which is interconnected, I guess that it's not that easy, but sure, it's one of the solutions.
But I think uncertainty added on that, right? Policy uncertainty. Because usually when we see this who goes first, it's usually not because there is problem with negotiation. Usually it's a problem because we don't know what will happen with monetary policy in uncertain era, right?
That's why market monetarists propose that nominal income rule, so that a monetary policy is not affected by things like this.
The nominal income, this would be the last thing I'll say about it, actually. The nominal income rule isn't a solution, though, because it's a solution to the wrong problem. It's a solution assuming that all prices are wrong. So we're going to readjust all prices by affecting the general price level, but it's not a problem of all prices being wrong. It's just that some are too high, some are too low. So restructuring, even if it is costly, and I actually don't think that it is that costly, no more than writing the initial contracts anyway, to take out the debt, allows you to realign all those prices.
Yes, I'd like to have a comment on this quotes about Mises and Rothbard, because I think when they say bad things about deflation, they mean another thing. When you read Mises, when he says that deflation is IQ, he writes about government policy, and he gives example of what he means by this bad deflation. It's Great Britain after Napoleonic Wars and Great Britain after World War I, when the government conducted a policy of imposing deflation on the market, when not deflation was, say, a market fund, like when you have a bank run in a banking that Mises advocated, and when Human Action can find a very positive statement about so-called secondary deflation. He says the entrepreneurs during the crisis lose faith in their abilities because they scrapped so badly in the boom, so they need big price differentials. So the faster the deflation goes, the faster entrepreneurs go back to the market and invest again. And Rothbard, I think, also is in the concept of monetary reform. You do not impose deflation on people. Forced deflation is bad, but not necessarily market deflation.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
And about debt deflation, or possibly explaining the length of America's Great Depression, I think that was not a big problem between 1929 and 1932. Some banks failed, but there was the small rural banks that invested heavily in agriculture. There was a big agricultural bubble starting from World War I and brought up by government in the 1920s. So the major banks were liquid. They did not have problems, and only then Roosevelt actually imposed bank holidays on banks, and banks didn't ask for it. So I think there was not a big banking crisis there, but debt crisis in America. So let's see how we can explain.
Yeah, I didn't make that historical case. General atmosphere led you to that. Okay, yeah. I didn't say that that's a great case of debt deflation theory, the Great Depression. I wouldn't say that. But you're actually addressing Fisher more, right?
Do you think that we have now, during the current economic crisis, such threat of secondary depression in Eurozone?
It depends where. In Germany, probably not. Right? Meaning that some time ago you could make the case for Italy, Greece, and Spain having secondary depression.
Has already started?
No, but the deposit base was flowing out from those countries to Germany. So in Germany you wouldn't have it, but then in those countries you would have it. Meaning that you have a movement of the deposit base from one country to the other. So the country that received deposits did not experience this secondary contraction, but the other country that experienced it, actually this outflow, they had this secondary effect, right? Because the initial problem was the debt problem of the government, right? The public debt. And then since you have all the interconnections between the debts and the banking system, the deposits were flowing out of the country. So that would be the secondary effect for those countries, but not for those countries. So you cannot make the case for the whole euro area.
It's not clear for me. Is it already started, or you see this secondary depression in that country.
For the whole, but for the whole Eurozone, generally, or for those countries? I don't know, Mateusz, you can answer. He's, know the actual.
I think that outflow deposit, I think, ended like in late 2012 and target balances are shrinking, but we still have, for example, negative CPI in Greece, so there is actual inflation there.
Not price deflation.
Yes.
Well, surely not because the productivity increased so much. There is more feta cheese produced and less huge piece.
I'm sure for this.
Was in Cyprus on the verge of a secondary depression?
Possibly, well, I don't know. I didn't study their cases, so I don't want to make ex cathedra statements. So, Nikolai, maybe you have some some thoughts you could share.
No, for the Cypriot case, most of the deposits which were built in were non-resident deposits, so I'm not sure that the impact on the monetary supply within the country has been so important. Then the argument which is being brought today, I have the feeling, is not that much about the deflation, but about the leveraging of the banking sector, by which the commentators mean that there is a kind of creditless growth, and everybody doubts that this is possible. One of the reasons is that business is so much accustomed to debt relations and to being refunded by the commercial banks that without this you do not get indeed restarting of the production processes. But at the same time, the economy, Cyprus is a difficult case because they have moved to a cash-based economy because of deposit restrictions. And because of that, the official data, of course, is not much relevant for total economic transactions. So it's difficult to say. But probably what they mean by debt deflation nowadays and the other is this double-dip recession, which was mentioned in respect to some countries in the region.
And just as an interesting thought experiment, you should consider that in Europe today, maybe there's a secondary inflation going on in Germany, a debt inflation with all the deposits flowing into the country.
Oh, right. An opposite case, right? That makes sense, right? Even the interest rates at some point were negative, right? Nominal interest rates were negative on German debt.
Yeah, I mean, and also in counterfactual terms, I mean, thanks David for mentioning inflation. I mean, in counterfactual terms, all the actions that the European system of central banks and IMF and ESM sponsored bailouts have done was actually to keep the money supply from falling, even in the periphery. So in a sense, we are witnessing counterfactually inflation even in the peripheral countries.
To fight monetary contraction.
Exactly.
I have one more question about this Fisherian model. Why is falling profits necessarily because falling output? Yes, one of the points of this model.
Well, because profits are the main reasons to expand output, right? To invest money, to invest in increases in output. Why would you increase output without, if you would?
Yeah, but if profits falling and you want to get more, earn more, so maybe you should invest in output. Get more.
Oh yeah, but ceteris paribus, right? If you have like given technology and given economics of scales and everything, and all you have just price difference. If the price difference is negative, you abstain from investing. It's better to keep the money hoarded rather than invested. Yeah, assuming of course that if you could spend more money to advertise and increase sales and so on, then sure. But assuming that you have everything else ceteris paribusized, then falling profits actually destroy the basic incentive to invest, right?
And
Last.
this is just a quick comment to follow up. And assuming the money earns no interest, or at least no negative interest.
Right, but then
Or you suspect the inflation will go up.
Right. But then if there is positive interest, it means that actually there are somewhere profits that have to be present somewhere, right? Because interest rate is positive because there is something on which you could earn the money, right? Okay.
Thank you.